Have you ever noticed something? Some people don't seem particularly smart. They're not geniuses. They don't have perfect plans. They don't know everything. Yet somehow, they keep moving forward. They start businesses, switch careers, make investments, meet new people, and create opportunities. Then there are people who are intelligent, educated, and hardworking. They spend hours researching, comparing options, and trying to make the perfect choice. Yet years go by and their lives barely change. What's going on? Most people assume success comes down to talent, intelligence, or luck. But after watching people for years, I've noticed something different. A lot of people aren't losing because they're not capable. They're losing because they can't make decisions. They get stuck, they hesitate, they overthink. And while they're still trying to figure out the perfect move, life keeps moving without them. Think about how often this happens. Someone wants to start a business. They spend 6 months researching, then another 6 months watching YouTube videos, then another year waiting for the right time. 3 years later, they still haven't started. Meanwhile, someone else jumps in with half the knowledge, makes a bunch of mistakes, learns along the way, and already has a functioning business. Who ends up ahead? Usually the person who started, not the person who knew more. The same thing happens with careers. Someone hates their job. Every day they complain about it. They know they're underpaid. They know they're unhappy. But they spend months debating whether they should leave. Then they spend months worrying about whether a new company might be worse. Then they spend months waiting for the perfect opportunity. Before they know it, 5 years have passed. The job they hated is still their job. Nothing changed. Not because they lacked ability, because they couldn't decide. Here's a hard truth that most people don't want to hear. Many opportunities don't disappear because someone else took them. They disappear because you waited too long. Opportunities have a shelf life. People often imagine opportunity as something that patiently waits for them. It doesn't. The business opportunity changes. The market changes. The person you wanted to meet moves on. The investment price changes. The dream job gets filled. The timing passes. Life rewards movement, not endless analysis. Now, don't get me wrong. Thinking is important. Planning is important. Research is important. But many people aren't actually thinking. They're hiding. They're using research as a way to avoid risk. They're using planning as a way to avoid action. They're using perfectionism as a way to avoid responsibility. Because once you make a decision, something uncomfortable happens. You become accountable. Now it's on you. If it works, great. If it fails, you have to deal with it. And that's what scares most people. Not the decision itself, the possibility of being wrong. So they stay in a strange mental prison. They keep telling themselves, I need more information. I need more time. I need to think about it. I'll decide next week. But next week becomes next month. Next month becomes next year. And eventually, indecision becomes a lifestyle. The problem is that indecision feels safe. That's why it's so dangerous. When you don't make a choice, it feels like you're protecting yourself. You haven't lost money. You haven't failed. You haven't been rejected. You haven't embarrassed yourself. But what most people don't realize is that avoiding action has a cost too, a massive cost. You just don't see it immediately. Imagine someone spends 2 years thinking about starting a side business. They never lose money. They never fail. But they also never earn anything. Those 2 years are gone forever. Imagine someone wants to learn a new skill. They spend months comparing courses, reading reviews, watching tutorials about tutorials. At some point, the research becomes more time-consuming than the actual learning. Again, nothing terrible happened, but nothing useful happened either. This is one of the biggest traps in modern life. We have access to unlimited information, but information doesn't automatically create progress. In fact, too much information often creates paralysis. Years ago, people had fewer choices. Now we have endless choices, hundreds of careers, thousands of business ideas, millions of videos, infinite opinions. And every opinion sounds convincing. One person says buy real estate, another says buy stocks, another says start a business, another says build a personal brand, another says move abroad, another says stay where you are. Eventually, you become overwhelmed. You start second-guessing everything. And when every choice seems risky, doing nothing starts to feel like the safest option. But here's the irony. Doing nothing is often the riskiest choice of all. Because while you're standing still, the world isn't. Your neighbors keep moving. Skills keep evolving. Industries keep changing. Opportunities keep appearing and disappearing. The gap between where you are and where you want to be slowly gets bigger. That's why decisive people often seem luckier. It's not necessarily because they're smarter. It's because they're participating in life. They're in the game. They're taking shots. They're getting feedback. They're making mistakes. They're learning. They're adjusting. Meanwhile, overthinkers are still sitting on the sidelines trying to calculate the perfect move. But life doesn't reward perfect calculations. Life rewards action. The truth is, most successful people don't know exactly what they're doing when they start. They just know enough to take the next step. Then they figure out the rest as they go. That's how businesses are built. That's how careers grow. That's how confidence develops. Not before action, after action. Confidence is often the result of movement, not the cause of it. Many people are waiting to feel confident before they act, but confidence rarely arrives first. Action comes first. Then confidence follows. So if there's one thing to remember, it's this. Your biggest obstacle may not be a lack of talent. It may not be a lack of resources. It may not even be a lack of opportunity. It may simply be the habit of hesitation, the habit of waiting, the habit of needing certainty before taking a step. And certainty is something life almost never gives. The people who move ahead aren't the ones who have all the answers. They're the ones willing to act before they do. That's where momentum starts. That's where opportunities begin. And that's often the difference between people who keep dreaming about a better future and people who actually create one.
Most people think overthinking means they're being careful. They think it means they're responsible. They think it means they're making smart decisions. But a lot of the time, overthinking has very little to do with intelligence. At its core, overthinking is often a trust problem. Not trust in other people, trust in yourself. Think about it. Why do some people spend weeks deciding something that another person decides in 10 minutes? The information is often available to both of them. The risks are often similar. The potential outcomes are often the same. Yet one person moves quickly while the other gets stuck. The difference isn't knowledge, it's self-trust. People who trust themselves don't expect every decision to be perfect. They understand that mistakes are part of life. If something goes wrong, they'll adapt. If they fail, they'll recover. If they choose the wrong path, they'll adjust. Because they trust their ability to handle uncertainty. People who don't trust themselves approach life differently. Every decision feels like a life or death situation. Every choice feels permanent. Every mistake feels catastrophic. As a result, they spend enormous amounts of energy trying to eliminate risk. But here's the problem. Risk can never be eliminated. It can only be managed. There is no perfect choice. There is no guaranteed path. There is no decision that comes with a 100% success rate. Yet many people spend years searching for exactly that. They're looking for certainty in a world that doesn't offer any. Take careers as an example. Someone asks, should I leave my current job? Sounds like a simple question. But inside their head, it becomes something much bigger. What if the new company is worse? What if I don't like the manager? What if the economy crashes? What if I fail? What if I regret it? What if I make the wrong choice? The list never ends. Notice what's happening. They're not evaluating the opportunity anymore. They're imagining every possible disaster. And because the human brain is incredibly creative when it comes to fear, it can always generate another reason to wait. The same thing happens in business. People say, I want to start a business, but I need more research. Then 6 months later, I still need more research. Then a year later, I'm almost ready. The funny thing is that almost ready can last forever. Because readiness is often a feeling, not a fact. And if you're waiting to feel completely ready, you'll probably be waiting for the rest of your life. The reality is that most successful people started before they felt ready. Not because they're reckless, because they understand something important. Action creates clarity. Thinking alone rarely does. Most people believe clarity comes first, then action follows. In reality, it's usually the opposite. You take action, you learn something, you adjust, then clarity appears. Imagine trying to learn how to swim. You can read books about swimming, watch videos about swimming, study swimming techniques for 6 months. But eventually, you have to get into the water. The water teaches lessons that books never can. Life works the same way. You can think about business forever, but customers teach lessons that books don't. You can think about relationships forever, but actual relationships teach lessons that theories don't. You can think about confidence forever, but confidence grows through experience, not imagination. This is why self-trust is so powerful. When you trust yourself, you stop demanding certainty. You stop expecting perfect outcomes. You stop treating every decision like a final exam. Instead, you begin seeing life as a series of experiments. Some experiments work, some don't. But every experiment teaches you something. That's how growth happens. Unfortunately, many people develop the opposite mindset. Somewhere along the way, they become terrified of mistakes. Maybe they grew up being criticized whenever they got something wrong. Maybe they were taught that failure is embarrassing. Maybe they learned to associate mistakes with personal worth. So now every decision carries emotional weight. Choosing the wrong option doesn't just mean making a mistake. It feels like proving they're inadequate. No wonder they hesitate. No wonder they overanalyze. No wonder they get stuck. Because they're not protecting their money. They're protecting their identity. The problem is that life doesn't reward people for avoiding mistakes. Life rewards people for learning from them. Look at almost any successful entrepreneur. Almost every one of them has failed at something. Bad investments, failed projects, terrible ideas, lost money, poor hires, poor decisions. The difference is that they didn't treat mistakes as evidence that they were incapable. They treated mistakes as information. That's a completely different mindset. One mindset says, I made a mistake, therefore I'm not good enough. The other says, I made a mistake, now I know something I didn't know before. The second mindset creates progress. The first creates paralysis. And paralysis is expensive, not just financially, emotionally too. Because every unfinished decision occupies mental space. Every unresolved choice drains energy. Every delayed action creates background stress. That's why chronic overthinkers often feel exhausted even when they haven't actually done much. Their minds are running non-stop. They're fighting imaginary battles all day long, evaluating, re-evaluating, doubting, second-guessing, repeating the same mental loops over and over. It's like having 50 browser tabs open in your brain all the time. Eventually, the system slows down. The solution isn't becoming reckless. The solution isn't making random decisions. The solution is building trust in your ability to handle whatever happens next. Because that's the real source of confidence. Confidence isn't believing you'll always succeed. Confidence is believing you'll be okay even if you don't. That's a huge difference. Once you understand that, decision-making becomes much easier. You stop asking, "What if this goes wrong?" and start asking, "If it goes wrong, can I handle it?" Most of the time, the answer is yes. You may not enjoy it, you may not like the consequences, but you'll survive. You'll adapt, you'll learn, you'll move forward. And that's exactly what decisive people understand. They aren't fearless. They aren't always right. They don't possess secret knowledge. They simply trust themselves enough to move before certainty arrives. While everyone else is waiting for guarantees, they're already gathering experience. And experience is worth far more than endless analysis. Because in the end, your future is rarely determined by the decisions you considered. It's determined by the decisions you actually made.
Have you ever met someone who seems unbelievably lucky? No matter what they do, things somehow work out. They find great opportunities. They meet the right people. They land good jobs. They discover profitable business ideas. They always seem to be in the right place at the right time. From the outside, it can look almost unfair. People look at them and say, "That guy's lucky. She always catches a break. Things just work out for them." But if you look closer, something interesting usually appears. What looks like luck is often the result of action, a lot of action. More action than most people are willing to take. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings about success. People see the outcome. They don't see the volume. They see the successful business. They don't see the 10 failed ideas that came before it. They see the great relationship. They don't see the dozens of conversations, introductions, and awkward first meetings. They see the promotion. They don't see the years of taking on extra projects and responsibilities. In other words, they see the win. They don't see the attempts. And attempts matter a lot. Imagine two people. The first person spends a year thinking about starting a business, researching, planning, analyzing, watching videos, reading books, making spreadsheets. The second person spends 1 month preparing and then starts. The business isn't perfect, the website looks average, the marketing is clumsy, the product has problems, but they launch anyway. Who has a better chance of succeeding? Most people assume it's the person who prepared more, but in reality, it's often the person who entered the game first. Because once you're in motion, you start receiving feedback, and feedback is incredibly valuable. Customers tell you what works. Customers tell you what doesn't. The market reveals information that no book can teach. Every action creates data. Every mistake creates knowledge. Every attempt improves judgment. Meanwhile, the overthinker is still trying to predict everything in advance. The problem is that reality is impossible to predict perfectly. No amount of planning can replace real-world experience. That's why action compounds. The more you do, the more you learn. The more you learn, the better your decisions become. The better your decisions become, the more opportunities you notice. Eventually, people start calling it luck, but it's often just accumulated experience. Think about networking. Some people seem to know everyone. They're constantly meeting interesting people. New opportunities seem to appear out of nowhere. Again, people call this luck. But what usually happened, they attended events. They introduced themselves. They reached out to strangers. They started conversations. They stayed connected. They took social risks, while others stayed home waiting for opportunities to arrive. One person created 50 chances. The other created 2. Of course, the first person appears luckier. They gave luck more opportunities to find them. This is something many people never understand. Luck is often attracted to movement, not stillness. The more actions you take, the more surface area you create for opportunity. Imagine a fisherman. If he never leaves the shore, his chances of catching fish are 0. If he goes out once a year, his chances improve slightly. If he goes out every day, his chances increase dramatically. The fish haven't changed, his exposure has. Opportunity works the same way. People who take action encounter more opportunities because they're exposed to more situations. They're meeting more people, trying more things, testing more ideas, learning more lessons. Eventually, people start calling it luck, but it's often just accumulated experience. Think about how many major life events happen unexpectedly. A random conversation leads to a job. A chance introduction leads to a business partnership. A side project becomes a career. A hobby becomes a source of income. None of these outcomes could have been fully predicted beforehand. They happened because someone was active enough to stumble into them. That's another reason decisive people seem lucky. They're constantly placing themselves in situations where good things can happen. They're buying more lottery tickets. Not literal lottery tickets, but opportunities. Most don't pay off. Some fail completely, but a few change everything. And those few successes are often enough. The overthinker never sees this. They focus on avoiding mistakes. The decisive person focuses on creating possibilities. That's a completely different way of approaching life. One mindset asks, how do I avoid losing? The other asks, how do I increase my chances of winning? The first mindset leads to caution. The second leads to opportunity. And opportunity is where growth happens. At the end of the day, luck isn't always random. A large part of what people call luck is actually exposure. Exposure to people, exposure to ideas, exposure to experiences, exposure to opportunities. And exposure comes from action. The people who seem luckiest are often the ones who simply gave life more chances to surprise them. They didn't wait for the perfect moment. They moved. They learned. They adjusted. And while everyone else was still deciding whether to begin, they were already halfway down the road.
Most people think overthinking is just a mental habit, a personality trait, something harmless. They'll say things like, I'm just a careful person. I like to think things through. I don't want to make mistakes. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. After all, nobody wants to make bad decisions. Nobody wants to lose money. Nobody wants to fail. But what many people don't realize is that overthinking isn't free. It comes with a cost, a very expensive cost, not just financially, emotionally, mentally, and sometimes even physically. The problem is that the cost is invisible. You don't get a bill in the mail. You don't see money leaving your bank account, so you assume nothing is happening. But something is happening every single day. Your energy is being drained. Think about the last time you had a major decision to make. Maybe it was changing jobs, starting a business, moving to a new city, ending a relationship, making an investment. What happened?
You probably didn't spend 5 minutes thinking about it. You spent days, weeks, maybe months. Your brain kept returning to the same issue over and over again. While driving, while eating, while trying to sleep, while working. Even when you weren't actively thinking about it, the decision was still sitting in the background, consuming mental resources. This is what makes overthinking so exhausting. You can spend an entire day doing almost nothing and still feel completely drained, because mental conflict consumes energy. Your brain is constantly running simulations. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if I regret it? What if everything goes wrong? The same questions repeat endlessly. Most of the time, no conclusion is reached, no action is taken, yet the emotional cost keeps growing. It's like leaving a car engine running 24 hours a day. Even if the car isn't moving, fuel is still being burned. Your mind works the same way. Constant worry burns energy. Constant doubt burns energy. Constant internal conflict burns energy. Eventually, that lack of energy starts affecting every area of your life. You become less productive, less focused, less motivated. Even simple tasks start feeling difficult, not because you're lazy, because your mental battery is already half empty. This is one reason why decisive people often appear more energetic. It's not necessarily because they have more stamina, it's because they aren't carrying around dozens of unresolved decisions. When they make a choice, they move forward. Their mental resources become available again. The overthinker, meanwhile, keeps reopening the same file in their head again and again and again. Now let's talk about money, because this is where overthinking becomes especially expensive. Most financial opportunities have a window. They don't stay open forever. A business opportunity exists today. Tomorrow, it may be gone. A promising partnership appears. Then someone else takes it. A growing industry emerges. Then the market becomes crowded. Timing matters. And overthinkers often miss timing because they're still looking for certainty. Imagine someone sees an opportunity to learn a valuable skill. Maybe it's coding. Maybe it's AI. Maybe it's digital marketing. Instead of starting, they spend months comparing courses, reading reviews, watching videos about which course is best, joining forums, asking for opinions, researching instructors. 6 months later, they still haven't started learning. Meanwhile, someone else picked a decent course and got to work. Who is ahead? Usually the person who started, not because they chose perfectly, because they accumulated experience while the other person accumulated information. Information feels productive. Experience actually is productive. There's a huge difference. This is why overthinking often creates the illusion of progress. You feel busy, you feel engaged, you feel like you're working toward a solution, but sometimes you're just moving in circles. It's like sitting in a rocking chair. There's movement, but no forward progress. Many people spend years trapped in this cycle. They mistake preparation for action, research for execution, thinking for progress, and before they realize it, a decade has passed. One of the most dangerous consequences of chronic overthinking is that it trains your brain to focus on threats. When you're constantly asking, what could go wrong? Your mind starts becoming a threat detection machine. You begin noticing risks everywhere, problems everywhere, potential disasters everywhere. Of course, risks exist. Every opportunity carries risk. Every investment carries risk. Every relationship carries risk. Every business carries risk. But successful people don't only see risks, they also see possibilities. Overthinkers often become so focused on avoiding losses that they completely ignore potential gains. This creates a major problem because wealth creation usually requires uncertainty. Starting a business is uncertain. Investing is uncertain. Building a career is uncertain. Moving to a better opportunity is uncertain. Nothing valuable comes with a guarantee. If your brain demands guarantees before taking action, you'll miss many of life's biggest opportunities. Not because the opportunities weren't there, because your requirements were impossible. You were waiting for certainty in an uncertain world. And that's a game nobody wins. There's another hidden cost that people rarely talk about. Overthinking damages self-confidence. Most people assume low confidence causes overthinking. Sometimes that's true, but the reverse is also true. Overthinking can destroy confidence. Here's why. Every time you delay a decision, your brain receives a subtle message: I don't trust myself. Every time you avoid taking action, I don't trust myself. Every time you endlessly seek reassurance, I don't trust myself. After years of repeating that pattern, your confidence naturally weakens. You begin believing that every decision is difficult, every challenge is dangerous, every uncertainty is a threat. Meanwhile, decisive people build confidence differently. They act, they make mistakes, they recover. Then their brain learns an important lesson: I can handle this. That lesson gets stronger every time they face uncertainty and survive it. That's where real confidence comes from. Not from positive thinking, not from motivational quotes, from evidence, from experience, from proving to yourself that you can navigate life even when things don't go perfectly. At the end of the day, overthinking isn't just costing you opportunities, it's costing you energy. It's costing you momentum, it's costing you confidence, and, perhaps most importantly, it's costing you time. Money can be earned back, opportunities can sometimes return, but time never does. Every month spent trapped in indecision is a month that could have been spent learning, building, growing, improving, moving forward. That's why the goal isn't to make perfect decisions. The goal is to stop letting fear disguise itself as careful thinking. Because in many cases, the biggest risk isn't making the wrong choice. The biggest risk is never making one at all.
One of the biggest myths about successful people is that they always know exactly what to do. People imagine that entrepreneurs, investors, executives, and high achievers have some kind of special ability. They picture them sitting down, analyzing every variable, and somehow arriving at the perfect decision every time. Reality is much less glamorous. Most successful people make mistakes all the time. They choose the wrong projects, they hire the wrong people, they enter the wrong markets, they trust the wrong partners. They lose money, they waste time, they fail. The difference isn't that they avoid mistakes. The difference is that they don't let the possibility of mistakes stop them from moving. That's a completely different mindset. Most people approach decisions with one question: what if I make the wrong choice? Successful people often ask a different question: how quickly can I learn whether this choice is right or wrong? Notice the difference. One mindset is trying to avoid mistakes. The other mindset is trying to gain information. That's why decisive people move faster. They understand something most people don't. A bad decision made quickly is often more valuable than a perfect decision made too late. That sounds strange at first, but think about it. Imagine two people considering a business opportunity. The first person spends 18 months researching. The second person spends 1 month researching and then starts. 6 months later, the second person discovers the idea doesn't work. They pivot. They try something else. By the time the first person finally makes a decision, the second person has already gained valuable experience and moved on to a better opportunity. Who is actually ahead? Usually the person who acted, because speed creates feedback, and feedback creates wisdom. One of the habits you'll notice among successful people is that they separate decisions into categories. They don't treat every decision as equally important. Overthinkers often do. To an overthinker, choosing a lunch restaurant can feel emotionally similar to choosing a career. Everything gets the same level of mental attention. Everything becomes a major event. Successful people don't operate that way. They know that some decisions matter a lot. Others barely matter at all. For small decisions, they move quickly. What should I wear? Which software should I use? Which book should I start with? Which restaurant should I pick? They decide and move on. Why? Because spending 30 minutes making a decision that affects 30 minutes of your life is a terrible investment of energy. Many people waste enormous amounts of mental power on trivial choices. Then they have no energy left when genuinely important decisions arrive. Successful people conserve mental resources. They save deep thinking for decisions that actually deserve it. Even for larger decisions, they usually set limits. This is another powerful habit. Instead of endlessly thinking, they create a decision deadline. For example, I'm going to spend 3 days researching this, or I'm going to gather information for 1 week and then make a choice. Once the deadline arrives, they decide. No endless extensions, no constant delays, no waiting for perfect certainty, because certainty isn't coming. Most major life decisions don't provide guarantees. Think about some of the biggest decisions people make: marriage, starting a business, moving to another country, changing careers, making investments, having children. No matter how much information you gather, uncertainty remains. At some point, the research stops being useful and fear starts disguising itself as preparation. That's when decisive people move. Another thing successful people understand is the concept of reversible and irreversible decisions. This idea can dramatically reduce overthinking. Many decisions are reversible. You can switch jobs, you can change business strategies, you can learn a different skill, you can move again, you can adjust, you can pivot. Yet people often treat reversible decisions as permanent life sentences. They act as if one wrong move will destroy everything. In reality, life is usually much more flexible than that. Most choices can be corrected, most mistakes can be repaired, most setbacks can be recovered from. Knowing this removes enormous pressure, because now the decision doesn't need to be perfect, it only needs to be good enough to move forward. Successful people are very comfortable with good enough. Overthinkers hate that phrase. They want the best option, the perfect option, the optimal option. The problem is that perfection is often impossible to identify beforehand, and the pursuit of perfection frequently becomes a form of procrastination. Meanwhile, good enough keeps producing results. Think about technology companies. Many successful products were released with flaws. Many best-selling books had imperfections. Many successful businesses started with rough websites, basic marketing, and incomplete systems. If their creators had waited for perfection, they might never have launched at all. Execution beats perfection far more often than people realize. Another trait decisive people share is that they trust their ability to adapt. This is huge. Most overthinking comes from trying to control the future. People want certainty because they believe uncertainty is dangerous. But decisive people don't depend on certainty. They depend on adaptability. They believe themselves to figure things out. They believe that if problems appear, they'll deal with them. If obstacles arise, they'll find solutions. If conditions change, they'll adjust. This confidence doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from experience. They've faced challenges before. They've survived mistakes before. They've recovered from setbacks before. So uncertainty doesn't scare them as much. They know they can handle it. That's a powerful advantage in life, because the future is always uncertain. No one gets special access to tomorrow. No one receives guaranteed outcomes. The people who thrive are not the people who predict everything correctly. They're the people who respond effectively when reality surprises them. And reality always surprises everyone. Perhaps the most important lesson successful people understand is this: indecision is also a decision. Many people think they're avoiding risk by delaying action. They're not. They're choosing a different kind of risk. The risk of missed opportunities, the risk of lost time, the risk of stagnation, the risk of watching life pass by while waiting for certainty. Every day you delay, you're still making a choice. You're choosing to remain where you are. Sometimes that's the correct choice. Often it isn't, but it is still a choice. The most successful people recognize this. That's why they don't obsess over making perfect decisions. They focus on making reasonable decisions and then fully committing to execution. Because ultimately, your life is shaped less by the quality of your intentions and more by the quality of your actions. And action always begins with a decision.
By now, one thing should be clear. The biggest difference between people who move forward and people who stay stuck is rarely intelligence. It's rarely education. It's rarely talent. And it's definitely not luck alone. More often than not, it's the ability to make decisions and take action. That sounds simple, but in reality, it's one of the hardest skills to develop. Because being decisive doesn't just require logic, it requires courage. The courage to act without guarantees. The courage to move before everything feels certain. The courage to accept that mistakes are part of the process. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid mistakes. Successful people spend their lives learning how to recover from them. That's a huge difference. Think about a child learning to walk. Nobody expects perfection. Nobody expects balance on the first attempt. The child falls, gets up, falls again, gets up again. Eventually, walking becomes natural. Now imagine if that same child approached walking the way many adults approach life. Before taking a step, they would ask, "What if I fall? What if I embarrass myself? What if I get hurt? What if there's a better way to walk? What if I should wait until I know more?" They would never leave the floor. Sounds ridiculous, right? Yet that's exactly how many people approach opportunities. They become so focused on avoiding failure that they never give themselves a chance to succeed. The truth is, life rewards movement, not because movement guarantees success, but because movement creates possibilities. Every action opens doors that were previously invisible. Every decision creates new information. Every attempt teaches valuable lessons, and every lesson improves your future decisions. This is why decisive people often improve faster than everyone else. They're not necessarily smarter. They're simply collecting more real-world experience. While others are thinking about the game, they're playing it. And experience is one of the few things that cannot be replaced. You can't download it. You can't buy it. You can't borrow it from someone else. You have to earn it yourself. That's why decisive people gradually become more confident, not because they have fewer problems, because they've handled more problems. Confidence isn't built by avoiding challenges. It's built by surviving them. Every time you face uncertainty and make it through, your brain learns something important. I can handle difficult situations. That lesson becomes part of your identity, and over time, fear starts losing its power. One mistake many people make is believing that decisiveness is something you're born with. They think, some people are naturally confident. Some people are natural leaders. Some people are just built differently. There's some truth to personality differences, but decisiveness is largely a skill. And like any skill, it can be trained. The first step is simple. Start making small decisions faster. Not life-changing decisions, small ones. Choose a restaurant faster. Choose a book faster. Choose a workout routine faster. Choose a project faster. Stop spending 20 minutes deciding things that barely matter. The goal isn't efficiency. The goal is building trust in yourself. Every quick decision sends your brain a message. I can choose and move forward. Over time, that habit grows. The second step is accepting that mistakes are inevitable. This is incredibly important. Most overthinking comes from an unrealistic expectation, the expectation that you should always get things right. But nobody does. Not entrepreneurs, not investors, not CEOs, not athletes, not anyone. Every successful person has a history of mistakes. The difference is they don't interpret mistakes as proof that they're incapable. They interpret them as part of learning. Once you truly accept that mistakes are unavoidable, decision-making becomes much easier. You stop demanding perfection from yourself. You stop treating each choice as a test of your worth. You start viewing decisions as opportunities to learn. That's a much healthier way to live. Another useful habit is setting decision deadlines. If a decision matters, give yourself time to think, but don't give yourself forever. Forever is where opportunities go to die. Gather information, evaluate the options, then commit. Even if you're still uncertain, especially if you're still uncertain, because uncertainty is normal. It's not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that you're dealing with reality, and reality is rarely crystal clear. The people who achieve extraordinary things are not the people who eliminate uncertainty. They're the people who act despite it. They understand that clarity often arrives after action, not before. One of the most powerful mindset shifts you can make is this. Stop asking, what's the perfect choice? Start asking, what's the next step? The perfect choice is usually impossible to identify. The next step is usually obvious. And life is built one step at a time, not one perfect decision at a time. If you look back at your own life, you'll probably notice something interesting. Many of the best things that happened to you were not perfectly planned. The important friendships, the unexpected opportunities, the career breakthroughs, the valuable lessons, many of them came from taking action without knowing exactly where it would lead. That's how life works. The future reveals itself gradually, not all at once. And the people who make progress are the ones willing to walk into that uncertainty. At the end of the day, improving your results isn't always about finding better opportunities. Sometimes it's about becoming the kind of person who can recognize and act on the opportunities already in front of you. Because opportunities are everywhere. The question is whether you'll move when they appear. So if there's one lesson to take away from this entire discussion, it's this. Your future will not be determined by the number of ideas you have. It will not be determined by how much information you collect. It will not be determined by how long you think. It will be determined by the actions you take. The people who create better lives are not necessarily the people with the best plans. They're the people who are willing to decide, move, adjust, and keep moving. Because the world rarely rewards the person who waits for certainty. It rewards the person who takes the first step